Well, hello there and good day, and welcome to Dystopian Review, the place where we dream of and occasionally live within nightmare worlds. I'm your host, Jesse Pullman. My cat Ariel has joined us, and it's been a while since I've been on camera on this channel. So today we're diving into our dystopian reality and talking about Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, and a term Harris used to describe Trump. It's a term she doesn't go on to do a fantastic job of defining. The term is fascist. We put that on screen for you. Fascist. And today we will look at two expert evaluations of what fascism at its core is to see if Trump fits within either of the two different definitions. We're going to talk about Roger Griffin's definition in his 1991 book, The Nature of Fascism, and about Umberto Eco's 14 points in his pamphlet, Fascism. Now, I know your attention is split 1,000 ways in such trying days, so I'm aiming to be as quick as I can with this. In this video, I'm asking you to suspend your disbelief, but also your agreement. I'd like you to open your mind and critically evaluate what I say. Compare what I say to what the experts I'm citing say, and decide if I'm honestly interpreting it. I'm also asking you to consider that anyone talking about anything on the internet may be wrong. So please, feel free to read the original sources I talk about and see what conclusions you draw. If you find you want more information from me and more interpretation, please leave a comment, and if there's still time before the election and it can still make an impact, I'll be happy to use this as a base to continue work on a much longer version of this video that I've currently gotten holding because it's kind of scrapped. Lastly, as my cat literally puts her paw on my microphone, thank you, love. I know you have big feelings. A little bit of background on me. I've got a bachelor's in history, a bachelor's in English literature, and an MA in secondary history education. I've about 8 years working in the educational system, teaching ELA and social studies, as well as working with students with special needs in a variety of forms, primarily as a one-to-one teaching assistant. I also have 5 years in hyperlocal journalism, where I ran the Weekly Freeporter, and we did things like examine the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy in our community and more. And to get this last bit out of the way, so I can't be accused of holding any kind of hidden biases here. Most people would say I'm pretty far to the left, even if I just consider myself a non-dogmatic progressive. And the actual far left, which I know it looks like it's on your right to you, but this is my left hand, they would probably just call me a liberal. I'm a Democrat who only joined the party to vote in primaries and is consistently underwhelmed by Democrats, especially, dare I add, New York State Democrats. With that said, let's dive in, starting with Harris, what she actually said after the intro. So at a CNN town hall hosted by Anderson Cooper, Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris was asked if she believed Republican candidate Donald Trump was a fascist. This is her answer.
You quoted General Milley calling Donald Trump a fascist. You yourself have not used that word to describe him. Let me ask you tonight, do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I also believe that the people who know him best on this subject should be trusted. Again, look at their careers. These are not people, with the exception, I think, of only Mike Pence. These were not politicians. These are career people who have served in the highest roles in national security.
All right, so we're going to stop there. This clip is readily available on YouTube. You can see that it is, in fact, on YouTube. You can see the title right here. So please feel free to go search this if you want to see what she says and how she explains it. But in my personal opinion, she did not meet my criteria of giving a definition of what a fascist is. She says he is one. She says other people say he is one, but she does not say what a fascist is. So that's what we're going to do, drawing on two different sources to do so. The first definition of fascism we're going to give is from Roger Griffin's definition of fascism as drawn from his 1991 book, The Nature of Fascism. It is, as you've probably guessed from the Wikipedia article in front of you, defined as Palingenetic ultranationalism. I am going to use this cursor a little bit, so please try to keep up with that. Now, I invite you to consider this term is quite tricky. I'm going to give it the briefest of summaries, but there's really a lot packed into it. So, and this will be a common refrain you hear from me over and over in this video, please go check the sources yourself and make up your own mind. In order to understand this term, we need to break down the meaning of these two words. First of all, palingenesis. If I can get it to isolate. If my cat doesn't get in the way. Is tied to the idea that there's a special sacred type of people who have been, for various reasons, suppressed throughout history. These people could very well experience a second coming, a renaissance of sorts, where they can take their rightful place as stewards of the rest of the world. Second, the term ultranationalism is much easier to understand. We aren't talking about patriotism or even run-of-the-mill nationalism. We're talking about a level of nationalism that transcends simple self-interest and depends, instead, on the exploitation of others for the glory of the nation in question. Combined, it means that fascism talks about a certain group of people who used to be special before they were oppressed. This group can regain their historic heights, but only if they follow a strictly ultranationalist agenda that puts the desires of this group above the wants or needs of all other groups. So, how does Trump do with this test? Well, he constantly quotes Adolf Hitler on the whole idea of immigrants poisoning the blood of the country. So that's probably a bad sign. He was asked in an interview on Fox News about the language he uses, and he was told specifically that this is the kind of language that Hitler and Mussolini use. Poisoning the blood is Hitler and Mussolini language. Trump responds, because our country is being poisoned. In other words, he affirms he's using Hitler's language, he just doesn't care, he thinks it's correct. Additionally, we finally have a timeline for when Trump thinks we should make America great again from. It's 1798, a time when this country is being built by the legal enslavement of kidnapped Africans. The country is being taken through a genocide committed against the Native Americans, and a whole bunch of other labor and effort and, things were done by women who were not allowed to vote or have any say in basically their lives. Such a great time to want to go back to. Don't we all want to go back to the time when I'm not even sure landless people had the right to vote? Like, do you still have to be a landowner to vote at this point? I don't know. The point of the matter is, this is not a time America was great, but, he does seem to like a lot of these laws that let him do mass deportations during that time. But maybe that's not enough. But maybe that's not convincing enough. We're going to use another lens of sorts to examine fascism. It's Umberto Eco's Fascism. It's a 16-page-ish pamphlet, basically. You see it on your screen here. And what it does is it goes through, Eco's life story growing up in Italy under Mussolini's fascism, the way his village was liberated in 1945, and many other things. Now, fascism is the word, the prefix "ur" suggests like an eternal fascism. Like, this is the way that fascism works. So when you see him say fascism, where I've highlighted it, that's what that's talking about. It's the idea that these points will help you define and determine if a government is fascistic. Here's the thing. Hitting one or two of these points doesn't necessarily guarantee a government is fascist in the sense that we would understand it through Palingenetic nationalism, for example. It could just be a sparkling authoritarianism. But once it's hitting a lot of these points, it doesn't have to hit every last one of them perfectly to mean you're in a fascist government. If you're missing one or two, that's not a gosh, we're not bad. It's more like we just haven't gotten there yet. I would also, at this particular moment, like to call your attention to Innuendo Studios. They've done a lot of videos on fascism and the alt-right. I'll link a particular video in the description because the bottom line is, if you're doing a lot of these numbers, there's 14 points here, and if you're doing, well, a lot of them, you are doing, to paraphrase Ian Danskin from Innuendo Studios, you're doing fascism at least part of the time, and for our purposes, that's all we need to know. Now, I've switched over to a Wikipedia version of this list because it's a little easier to scroll with. It's a little easier to get everything on the same page. It does shorten the definitions here, so I do encourage you, again, if you want to see the full list of like how deep this goes, please read the original source, but for the very least, this list will help us get through. So we're going to lightning round this because, you know, there's a lot here. So the first is the cult of tradition. And I mean, let's face it, the idea of dredging up some past American greatness, the whole concept of the Palingenetic MAGA myth, is an appeal to tradition. In our case, it is particularly a Christo-fascist theocratic classicalism, such as religion-based opposition to queer people's mere existence, for example. But, you know, you'll also see that with family structures, how God is supposed to be above the husband, who's above the wife, who's above the children, that sort of thing. There's like umbrellas. It makes no sense. Look into that. That's a thing. The second is the rejection of modernism, which, again, wanting to go back in time to a supposed great era is always a rejection of modernism. But it manifests itself also in things like the way that conservatives, and especially MAGA people, refuse to accept that climate change is a real thing. Because, after all, if the world can indeed be changed by the efforts of humankind, even in negative ways we didn't realize we were doing at first, we later learned, but that's oil companies for you. It means their idealized traditionalist order may not be a natural or even desirable state to land in. If we can change our planet's, I can't think of a word here other than climate, we can definitely change its governmental and authority structures, and that scares the daylights out of them. Third, and this follows with that, action for action's sake. It's interesting because conservatism tends to be against action, right? But then you hear candidates talk about rounding up millions upon millions of people who immigrated to the U.S. in a way they don't approve of. Even legal residents, they accuse of ridiculous, and I'm just going to use the word bullshit, like eating pets. Also that what? And this is a thing J.D. Vance talked about in a debate, if I recall correctly. The low-quality homes that these people live in, probably not in the best condition to begin with, working low-paying jobs, can have those things taken from them as they're kicked out of the country and handed off to Americans who aren't taking those low-paying jobs and living conditions because, A, they can get better, and B, they're not great. Which is why only people that have marginal situations and are marginalized will do them in the first place. Anyway, let's keep going. 4, disagreement is treason. This one actually got spicy today. It's November 1st. It's 7:59 in the morning. And we're talking about, well, the enemy within. Disagreement is treason. Just Google this. Or DuckDuckGo it, whatever. And then look up what he said about Liz Cheney yesterday and the precisely chosen number of 9 guns she should face. I'm not sure what that means, but I do have a theory. Anyway, 5, the fear of difference. I mean, wow. What could be more challenging than a difference? If you've got this authority structure in place, a difference is deadly. So again, see the ethnic cleansing we were talking about with regards to, you know, action for action's sake and kicking millions of immigrants out. But think about Trump's general hatred of Muslims, the conservative movement's hatred of queer people, all that jazz. If you're different, you're a threat to them. There's an appeal to a frustrated middle class. And this one almost has some truth to it, right? You know how Trump will ask you if you're better off now than you were 4 years ago? Because of inflation and gas prices, right? Thanks, Kat. You just clicked buttons for me. You know, the gas prices are higher. Why are the gas prices higher than they were in 2020? Oh, you weren't going anywhere in 2020. That's right. You were in a lockdown. And then, guess what? The economy kind of had a little bit of trouble because of the lockdowns and stuff, man. It's not complicated, but the middle class is frustrated. And look, middle class frustrations goes back far beyond Trump's term. Think of the Fight for 15 that happened at 2016 that has now probably, it should be more like a fight for 20 with inflation. I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, the middle class is frustrated, and rightly so. But they, as we'll see later, they have very specific solutions to that. but we'll get to that later. Number 7 is the obsession with a plot. My phone just turned the screen off, so I don't have my little scripty in front of me. But yeah, 2020 election. It was stolen. First of all, we're going to say the 2016 election was stolen if he lost, but he won. And he insisted he won the popular vote, too, which, is delusional. But no, there's a grand deep state that helped steal the 2020 election. What more do I need to say? We're still litigating it in 2024. And just as a side note, when this guy Hitler tried to overthrow the German government in November of, I want to say, 1932, he was in jail by April of the next year. Is Trump in jail yet? I don't mean booked, I mean like in jail. No, not really. 8. This one is less defined. This one is a weird one. It's the idea that their enemies are cast as, at the same time, too strong and too weak. So, finding an example for this is tricky, right? Because they're dangerous, but they're weak, and there's this weird dance that fascism does. So I want you to think about how Joe Biden is labeled as a Marxist, communist, fascist, which doesn't make sense, who stole the 2020 election from the sitting president. But he's also so weak that Vladimir Putin thought he could get away with invading Ukraine. He's so weak that Hamas decided we better attack Israel because, Joe Biden won't do anything. Weird, huh? Joe Biden stole the election, but is too weak to fight this nonsense? Like, really? Huh, okay. I don't think that's how that works, but sure, right, buddy? Okay. Number 9, pacifism is trafficking with the enemy because life is permanent warfare. This is a deep one. Trump will routinely talk about making peace with our enemies. Of course, our enemies are notoriously horrible dictatorships like Russia, but he wants peace with them. The operative theory on this, by the way, is that he wants to establish spheres of influence that best benefit the U.S., or rather himself. Also, it's worth noting that he pulled the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal, a project which independent analysis had proven was working, and later bombed an Iranian general, in an assassination basically, which led to a retaliatory attack that caused our troops in Iraq severe brain damage that he has repeatedly dismissed as, I quote, headaches. I'll leave you to think about that, especially if you might be a veteran who maybe saw some rockets flown at them at the time. I couldn't possibly speak to that. I am way too not in shape to have ever been to have been a soldier. That's not me. But for those who have suffered under warfare, I want you to think about having your injuries compared to headaches. Guarantee you that's not how that works. Speaking of contempt for the weak, or the proclaimed weak, again, remember, you're at the same time too strong and too weak. Do I really need to give any examples? I will. Think back to 2015 when he mocked Sergei, I hope I'm saying his name right, I could be wrong, Sergei Kovalevsky, a New York Times journalist with a physical disability. He bent his arm in a weird way, he took on a weird voice, he demonstrated bizarre demeanor that was clearly meant to mock a man with a physical disability. That was in 2015. That box got checked before he was ever president. Number 11, this is the one I'm having a little bit of a hard time finding. Everybody is educated to become a hero. Okay. This one's hard. Maybe you have an example you can leave in the comments. My demonstration for this, best I can come up with, is that he views people that are heroic because they helped him. The heroes who attacked the Capitol on January 6th to stop the steal. He calls them hostages on a regular basis. If you're a hostage, you're held unjustly. If you're held unjustly and you're known to be held unjustly, you're a hero to somebody. And so all you gotta do is be a schmuck who attacks cops with Blue Lives Matter flags, and that's just wonderful. I know we spent a long time on this page. I apologize for that. We're almost done. Machismo! This is so obvious I'm barely going to say anything. There's a reason why conservatives try to attack well-adjusted, sane men like Tim Walz. He proves you can have a healthy masculinity that allows women to, control their own bodies. and vote the way they want to vote. You know that recently an article ran against him talking about how he seduced a Chinese Communist Party person's daughter back when he was like traveling the world, and like that's a bad thing, but also like, you know, he's Tampon Tim, very feminine man. Again, it's the strong weak thing. He's strong enough to hook up with the enemy, and I can't, man. It's insane. 13. We're getting done with this, and this is the one I said we would mention later. Selective populism. Now, I believe personally, as a person fairly far on the left, that populism can be a positive force when applied correctly. If a lot of people want something, say, single-payer healthcare, we should have a discussion about that. We should probably have that. But the key to this point as being fascistic is that this is selective populism. Trump and his allies constantly talk about how real Americans, so-called, have specific wants and needs. They will say halfway rational shit. Like, why are we sending money to Ukraine when we need it to rebuild after hurricanes? That's almost a point, right? I mean, they're totally different resources. You're not going to do much with a HIMARS to rebuild a city after it's been hurricaned, but either way, they deny that the climate change is amplifying hurricanes and making them weirder and worse, and they never spend any kind of money on rebuilding things, and instead that money goes to tax cuts for the wealthy and oil subsidies. So yeah, selective populism. Finally, 14th, newspeak. A term so gloriously redolent in Orwellianism, it is wild. Remember when critical race theory was so dangerous to schools, CRT? And how all of these terms were super scary threats to your average, read, white man American. When you break down what they actually mean, none of the threats about them are realistic. That's what we're talking about here. Please let me look you all in the eyes. I've just gone through a lot of information with you. More than I thought I would go through. It took much longer than I thought it would. I apologize for that, and I sincerely appreciate you sticking around. If your head is swimming, if you don't remember what I'm talking about, if you don't believe a thing I quoted happened, if you think I got something only half right and I'm missing context, or even if you just need some time to process, please take a moment, pause this video, and do whatever Google searches you need to do, or DuckDuckGo, or Yahoo, whatever. But with that said, look me in the eyes here. Donald Trump is a fascist. He meets every one of Umberto Eco's criteria for fascism as Umberto Eco lived it as a child. Furthermore, he clearly fits within Roger Griffin's definition of fascism as Palingenetic ultranationalism. If everything I've said thus far has failed to convince you, may I remind you that this man gave a speech on January 6th, 2021, to these pictured rioters before they attempted a coup that would have preserved his authority, and he still refuses to accept that he lost an election. He clearly lost. These rioters got many police officers killed, either through direct injury or through a series of suicides, very likely caused by brain damage and post-traumatic stress. They even convinced a woman to attempt to murder members of our government, all of which ended with her paying the ultimate price for Trump's ambition. Also, as a quick side note, I may have misspoken earlier. I may have been thinking of the American and Trump's flags used to bludgeon these people, instead of the thin blue line flag. I don't think that changed the metaphorical impact that the physical ones had. In fact, it may make them worse. This is not a hypothetical situation where we are asking, with possible paranoia, whether he will attempt to seize and or retain power through illegal means. The man has tried it already. I almost forgot to mention this, but please do take a moment to go to www.vote.org to confirm your voter information, including your registration, and to know what's on your ballot. Make a plan to vote and get out and vote. Thank you.